Howdy historians, Mr. Montgomery here bringing you a flip lesson about the domestic concerns of George Washington's presidency. So now that we've seen him organize the federal government, stabilize the credit and economy of the country, and also handle foreign affairs, now we need to see how Washington is going to handle his domestic concerns as well. So before we get going here, a couple reminders. One, you know these because you see them every time. Make sure that you define the vocabulary associated with this unit. You can find it on your worksheet. Take notes as we go, and of course, remember you can pause this as you need to. And then answer the wrap-up question. It's actually singular this time after you watch the video, and then bring all this stuff to class. But you know this because the words don't change, just the picture at the bottom. For those of you following along with the lecture outline, we are in part 4 here, Washington and Adams presidencies, and we're in Washington's presidency D, domestic concerns. So let's go ahead and hop into it here and see what's going on domestically under the presidency of George Washington. So the first thing we're going to take a look at here is what's going on with George Washington and Native Americans out west. So a continuous pattern that we see here throughout the course, as the western frontier moves west, encounters with Native Americans are bound to occur, and they are typically violent. Now what's making things worse as settlers, or I should say Americans now, are pushing west, they're very upset to find out that British forts are still operating in the modern-day Midwest, and that these British forts are also supplying the natives with weapons and oftentimes encouraging the natives to go out and attack Americans because, of course, they're still upset about the American Revolution and how their lack of ability to trade with some of these groups is hurting their economy. So there's some problems out west. And what we eventually see is a battle. The battle is the Battle of Fallen Timbers in 1794. So the colonists, they're led by General Anthony Wayne, and what we saw here was the American forces under General Anthony Wayne defeat a group of natives that included a large portion of Shawnee in northwest Ohio, near modern-day Toledo. And then thereafter, the defeated tribes were forced to follow and sign the Treaty of Grenville. So you can see the Treaty of Grenville here, and you can see in the purplish color here the land that was given up to the Americans and ceded by the different Indian tribes. And this, of course, is going to now be open to settlement. And what we really saw here, the main impact was that the people out on the frontier were happy that Washington was able to send some men along with General Wayne to be able to put down these tribes, gain these lands, and then allow them some freedom of movement and protection along the frontier. And again, this is something that the government wasn't able to do very well prior to the Constitution. So nice job at the time for George Washington to provide some safety on the frontier. Fairly small, but shows that the government is more effective. Now, the biggest event during Washington's presidency when it came to domestic concerns was the Whiskey Rebellion. So this flares up in western Pennsylvania in 1794, and this represented a very large challenge to the new government. You can see that your final question here, the one summary question for this unit, is to compare the Whiskey Rebellion to Shays' Rebellion. So kind of keep that in mind as we go through the information. Now, this rebellion, it really starts because of Hamilton's excise tax on whiskey. Whiskey was being taxed at 2.5 cents per gallon. And the farmers in western Pennsylvania absolutely resented and hated this whiskey excise tax. A lot of them were corn and wheat farmers, and they would take their excess crop and they would turn it into whiskey. That way it would prevent the crop from spoiling. It was also an in-demand good and product that a lot of people wanted. So they felt that they were being, burdened by this tax and that they were being singled out. Another thing that made this tax bad is that there still wasn't a lot of money rolling around in the states at this time and throughout the country. So whiskey was actually used as currency along the western frontier and in western Pennsylvania. So they didn't have any dollars, they didn't have any currency, so they literally would use whiskey as money. So this seemed like a tax on money. So this is going to cause all kinds of resentment. So what we saw here was Western Pennsylvania farmers, they were attacking the revenue and tax collectors. They were trying to halt the collection because they didn't want to pay this tax. They felt singled out. They were very upset by it. And eventually 5,000 of them even got together and marched through the streets of Philadelphia. So Washington knew that this had to be put down quick. These whiskey boys had to be stopped. And he's going to actually be able to do it, which is a huge difference in comparison to Shays' Rebellion. So Washington hears about this, and this strong central government that's been established can't have violence in the streets, and they need to be able to actually enforce their own laws. So Washington assembled a group of 15,000 militiamen. Alexander Hamilton was put in charge of them, and they went out and they were able to put down the Whiskey Rebellion without a whole lot of resistance. It was actually, pretty tame, especially in comparison to Shays' Rebellion. There were a few casualties, 3 people were killed, but it wasn't massive, it wasn't violent, there wasn't a lot of street fighting. And what we really see here, the big effect, is that once this was put down, and it was put down very quickly once the militiamen arrived, this showed how substantially stronger the government was than it was under the Articles of Confederation. Washington handled it quickly, he handled it well, the government could now command the people's respect, and this was not a repeat of the slow and ineffective response to Shays' Rebellion. So this really answered the question if the government was strong enough to deal with a rebellion against its own laws, and it showed that the government was able to actually enforce its own laws as well. Now, as you can imagine, there were many people that didn't like the handling of this. The excise tax still wasn't all that loved either, but quickly there was more demand for the whiskey that was being sold, trade started to increase, and the rebellion really died out just as quickly as it flared up. But now we can see that the government is effective, it's going to work, it can enforce its own laws, and it's strong enough to live on. So very different in comparison to Shays' Rebellion, but a great compare and contrast for the two of them. Now, the last big thing going on under Washington's presidency is that the country was gaining more land out west. In the 1790s, we had gained more land through the Battle of Fallen Timbers and the Treaty of Greenville. John Jay's Treaty also started to give us more access to western land, as did the Pinckney Treaty, which gave us access to more land in the west. So now we've got to find a way to, again, settle these lands like we had under the Articles with the land ordinances of 1785 and 87. So we've got these new lands, and what is passed is the Public Land Act of 1796. This established an orderly procedure for dividing and selling this land at reasonable prices. The sale and the profits were then used to pay down on debt. And as a result of this, and the precedent set by the Northwest Ordinance, Vermont, Kentucky, and Tennessee, as you can see circled down here, were able to come in as states. So Vermont came in 1791, Kentucky in 1792, and Tennessee in 1796. So what we see here is a lot of positive examples of Washington's leadership. He handled his domestic issues very well. There weren't major flare-ups or problems. So just as he had organized the government, stabilized the economy, and done a good job keeping us out of massive foreign affairs, he was also able to take care of the domestic problems as well and further his reputation as an effective leader, but more importantly, showed that this new constitution and the new government that they had created under it was going to work, it was effective, it was feasible, it could apply its own laws, it could manage its western lands, it could even negotiate treaties with Native Americans. Now, as we look ahead, what we're going to see is Washington is going to be absolutely exhausted after his second term. He is going to decline his invitation to continue to be the presidency, much to the chagrin of people like Alexander Hamilton, and eventually he's going to give his farewell address, and in essence, kind of unbeknownst to him, set the two-term precedent that presidents will follow all the way until FDR, when he eventually is elected to 4 terms. So he was incredibly successful in so many ways, and we've seen that throughout the unit. So, you know what to do. Make sure you have the vocab finished. Make sure you finish the post-lesson question, singular, not plural this time. Make sure you jot down any questions that you have so we can discuss them during class. Bring all this stuff to class. And a little did you know / can you find it. Washington, of course, was married to Martha. But before he was devoted to Martha, he actually had somewhat of a secret lover. It was his neighbor's wife. At one point he wrote to her, quote, "The world has no business to know the object of my love declared in this manner to you," end quote. Can you tell me tomorrow in class the name of George Washington's secret side piece lover? If you can, write it down on a little piece of paper. I'll give you a piece of extra credit. Nice job once again, as usual with the flip lesson. Hopefully it went well. I will see you in class. Adios.